Hello folks, this is Sullla here again. Today I'm going to be doing a video podcast here for you with a little bit more information about supports. This is a request that I've had from a number of people on the channel, people wanting to know a little bit more about different supports, how they work, and just do a whole podcast just specifically on the role of support, since that's what I play the most and it's the thing that I know best. So this is what I'm going to be giving you today, and I'm going to try to put in some just video stuff in the background to watch while I'm running through this. But if you want, you can just listen to the audio because that's what the focus is going to be on. Now what I'm going to do first is give you an overview of things that supports generally have in common. That's looking at things like masteries, runes, and item builds, which tend to be pretty similar on most supports. And then I'm going to talk individually about the 8 support champs that I think are viable right now for League of Legends. I think there's really only 8 supports that are true supports in a real sense, not just another character role masquerading as a support. And I'll go through and talk about just briefly the skills of each one in particular, some possible ADs, attack damage champs that they can be paired with, and then also a few tips on playing against them. So anyway, let's get started and talk about some of the things that supports have in common. In terms of masteries, generally speaking, I think it's best to run 0-9-21 in terms of masteries on supports right now. There's not a whole lot in the offensive tree that you want for supports, just because supports are not there to do damage. It's generally more important for them to survive, and in order to, they generally just want to stay alive in fights so they can continue helping out the rest of the team. So a couple points in the defensive tree works pretty well. You can often take 2 points in both the armor and MR masteries, and then you can grab the plus 60 health and then the the veteran scar mastery that goes along with it. That's pretty useful because supports tend to die very easily if you don't grab a little bit of extra health for them. So that generally works well for me, is to put the 9 points in the defensive tree and just grab a little extra armor, MR, and then health. But I mean, people can certainly do things differently as well. I know some people just run 30 points in the support tree, and while I don't think that that's as good, or the utility tree, excuse me, while I don't think that's as good, it is certainly viable. So like I said, I usually run 0-9-21 in the utility tree. There are a lot of different things that you want to get there. You can pick up the improved flash and the improved clairvoyance are of course an obvious point to take if you're running flash and clairvoyance, which is something that's quite common on supports. Other things like getting extra mana and extra mana regen are very useful on a number of supports, particularly ones like Sona or Taric, who tend to run out of mana very, very quickly if you don't get the extra mana and the extra mana regen. And then other stuff in there is quite useful. Obviously, you want to get all the points in the passive gold bonus. Supports need to stack up passive gold, so you can get, I believe, 2 extra gold per 10, 2 extra gold every 10 seconds in the utility tree. So that's an obvious thing to pick up for supports. And I've also really come to like the starting 40 gold on supports as well, just because if you take the 2 points in that utility tree mastery, you can get 40 starting gold, and then that allows you to start with a fairy charm, with a health pot, and then with 4 wards. And I really like starting with 4 wards. I found that that works quite well. You can also do some interesting stuff with vision wards there as opposed to normal sight wards if you pick that up. And then, of course, if you're going to be putting all those points in the utility tree, the 6% cooldown reduction, that's for free. Cooldown reduction, very important on most supports. And then also Presence of the Master for the 21 points. That gives you extra 15% cooldown reduction on your summoner spells. It's just sort of a no-brainer. So anyway, I think 0-9-21 is generally the way to go on most supports, but you can certainly play around with that and see what works for you. In terms of runes, what I found generally, what I like to do with the supports is to run something that I think is pretty standard on the supports, is to run armor on the reds. And so yes, that's sort of an unorthodox out of slot place, but it's really one of the only places you can get armor on a lot of supports. So to put armor runes on the red runes, the marks, then put mana regen on the yellow runes. And again, if you want more armor, you can replace mana regen on the yellow runes, the seals. That's generally the place that you would normally put armor stuff from your runes. And then, of course, standard magic resist, either flat MR or magic resist per level, your choice. It depends on what you want to do. Flat MR might be better on support since they tend not to get as many levels as a lot of the other champs, but really either one can work. And then the quints are pretty standard. You want a passive gold per 10 on the quints. That's pretty standard on supports. Now, alternate options, you can stack more gold per 10 on the yellows. Riot recently introduced the gold per 10 seals as well. I personally don't use them just because I feel like having some kind of extra mana regen is useful on a lot of supports. You wouldn't need it on a support like Soraka, but a lot of the other supports really will run out of mana quite quickly if you don't have some kind of mana regen. So again, it depends on the support, but some combination of the things I've outlined do tend to work well. And again, I know that putting the armor on the marks on the red runes is a little bit unorthodox, but it's really the only place you can get armor on a support. So it tends to work well because the things that traditionally go on the red runes, the marks, you would want things like armor or magic penetration, or you would want like flat AD, and none of those things really work that well on supports. I know that some people actually will take flat AD on the red runes, on the marks, and use it to harass in lane, but I think that getting extra armor works a little bit better there. So again, your choice, but can figure it out. In terms of summoner spells, generally what people run on supports is some combination of heal, clairvoyance, and flash, some combination two of the three. I tend to take heal and flash if I'm playing in more of a solo queue environment where I don't think that clairvoyance is going to be as useful. If I'm playing with a full team of 5 or like 4 out of 5 people and we're all on voice chat together, then I'll probably take clairvoyance there, just because of the clairvoyance really is still useful despite the heavy nerfs put on it, but it's not as useful outside of a team environment. If you're just playing in solo queue, then grabbing summoner heal might be more useful. Now I like to have flash. Some people like to play with CV and heal, which is certainly viable, but I just personally like to have flash on supports. I feel like it enables me to get out of trouble, but like I said, some combination of the three of them generally works. More unorthodox is taking exhaust or ignite on the support. You can do that if for very aggressive lanes, but that's sort of less common. You will see that sometimes. Sometimes when I've played support Nunu, for example, I'll take flash exhaust just because Nunu's really good at slowing people and chasing them down, and exhaust synergizes well with that. So you can run exhaust or ignite, but then you have to give up one of those other summoner spells. Usually people give up flash if they're going to take exhaust or ignite. So if you're going to go for a very aggressive laning combo, you can certainly do that, but it does reduce the margin for error if you're going to be doing that, so just be aware of that. Then finally, item builds. Most supports tend to share the same item builds. Generally, they're based around getting the passive gold per 10 items. So the typical start for a support is, like I said, getting a fairy charm and then some combination of health pots and wards. I found, as I said, I like getting the 2 points in the utility mastery that lets you start with extra gold, and then starting with a fairy charm, 1 health potion, and then 4 sight words. Again, I really like the 4 sight words as opposed to starting with 3, which is what I used to do, just because oftentimes, I think I've said this in some videos before, oftentimes as a support you need to ward 2 different locations. Oftentimes you'll put some kind of ward on the river in order to prevent from getting ganked there, either in the river or in the tri-brush, and then you put another ward in one of the 2 bottom brushes in lane. You know how there's the 2 brushes in lane and bottom lane. You'll often put a ward there and then another one on the river. So that's 2 wards. Now if you start with 3 wards, you can't double ward those spots. You're going to only, after you double ward at first, once they run out, you're only going to have 1 ward to place. But if you start with 4 wards, then you can double ward both spots twice, and that means that you can stay in lane longer. Since the wards last for 3 minutes, you can generally stay in lane up until about the 8-minute mark, and that's when you have enough passive gold that's been built up to get you your first gold per 10 items. So I really like starting with the 4 wards, and I've been having a lot more success with that. It just seems to work better. Anyway, after that, usually the first item you want on a support is you want to turn that initial fairy charm into a philosopher's stone. It gives you passive gold benefit, it gives you health regen in lane, and it gives you mana regen in lane. So these are all things that are really, really useful. And in particular, the supports that go through mana quickly will really benefit from that Philosopher's Stone. So that's typically the first item. Second item is usually either a Heart of Gold or boots, just the standard boots, whatever you can complete, some combination of them, but those are the items you'll be shooting for next. The standard boots of speed, and then a Heart of Gold. From there, it's a little bit more open. Oftentimes, what I will do is just try to rush Shirelias as quickly as possible. Shirelias is an amazing item on support. It gives you, again, more health. It gives you more cooldown reduction. It gives you extra health and mana regen. It really has everything that you'd want, and using Shirelia is just absolutely amazing for initiations. It's one of the most useful items in the game, and it's possibly my favorite item in the game right now, just because it's so useful on so many different classes. There's nothing wrong with having 2 or even 3 Shirelias on the team. Those initiations just can completely swing team fights in your favor if you get practiced at using that. So you almost certainly want Shirelias at some point, and earlier the better. After that, like I said, it's a little bit more wide open. Some supports can benefit from getting a lucky pick, ones that scale better with ability power, and Soraka is one of the primary examples with that. Soraka scales better with AP than a lot of the other support champs. So you can always go for that third gold per 10 if you want. You don't really want the Avarice Blade though. That doesn't really work on any support that I can think of. So you can go for the extra gold per 10. Alternately, you can try to go for Aegis of the Legion, which is another great support item. If your jungler or your top lane is not building that, then it's a good item for you to pick up. Alternately, the new Stark's Fervor, Zeke's Herald, is a nice item as well. It's pretty good. It gives you cooldown reduction, it gives you health, and then it has an aura benefit. The one drawback to that item is it doesn't really do anything until you complete the item. So if you just have like the component parts, if you just have like the attack speed dagger and the vamp scepter, it's not doing anything for your team. It doesn't really do anything until you complete the item. So you can sometimes get the Kindle gem there, and then you can just wait and hold off on completing the item until you have enough for the complete cost. So that's another way to go. You can also turn your Heart of Gold eventually into the other new support item. It's like the Iron Locket, I think it's called. I haven't used that. I actually haven't built it even a single time yet since they just introduced it in the most recent patch. It's a solid item. It's something that you'll want to turn your Heart of Gold into eventually if you're playing a support, but I think it's relatively low on the priority scale. It doesn't seem to be that useful to me. The Aura effect, which is health regen for the full team, not that great. I mean, it's nice to have, but it's not that pressing. It seems less useful than a lot of the other items. And the active component, which is a team-based damage shield, that would be very useful against like a burst damage team, maybe against a double AP setup if the other team's just trying to burst you down. Otherwise, probably not that worthwhile to rush. I think that Aegis and I think that Shurelya's are both considerably more useful for the team, and possibly even Zeke's Herald, although I haven't experimented as much with it. But anyway, some combination of those items, usually good. For the boots, you generally want to turn boots into either cooldown boots or Merc Treads, one of the two. If you're going to be getting Zeke's Herald in addition to Shurelya's, that actually gives you enough cooldown reduction right there, so you can go for Merc Treads, but of course Merc Treads are more expensive. If you're going to skip Zeke's Herald, then you probably want cooldown boots just to max out your cooldown reduction. So anyway, some combination of those items tends to work, and it's really quite similar for all supports. There are some minor differences in item builds, but generally speaking, supports are all going to want some combination of those items, and they all build quite similarly. So I don't feel out of place in just grouping them together like that. Alright, let's turn and look then at some of the individual support champs. And I'm going to try to go through some of the more commonly played ones first, and then work down to some of the more unorthodox ones from there. Most common support champ that you see right now is the one who I think is on top at the moment. That would be Sona. Sona is under a lot of discussion right now. It sounds like she's going to be getting incoming nerfs in one of the upcoming patches, and that's probably deserved. Hopefully Riot won't screw it up. Hopefully they will address the one thing that should be nerfed, which is Sona's early game damage on her Q, which is very, very strong for the early game. Hopefully they will not mess her up and reduce her to worthlessness status. So anyway, let's run through Sona's 3 skills, or her 4 skills, and talk about what it is that makes Sona Sona and why she's so valued right now. Sona is generally getting either first picked or banned in pretty much all of competitive play at the moment, and that's usually a sign that a champion is a little bit too strong. So some kind of nerf is probably justified, as much as I hate to see it as a Sona player. But like I said, she's really quite strong. So what Sona does is she basically has 3 different skills. Each one gives her an active as well as a passive feature. Sona's Q is called Hymn of Valor. It's basically her damage skill. It grants a passive aura that grants extra attack damage and ability power, which goes up per point in the skill. So anyone who's around Sona will get that passive addition to attack damage and ability power. Then there's an active, which sends out 2 little bolts of energy, and they'll damage the 2 nearest targets. You don't actually aim the skill, it just hits the 2 nearest targets, and it will prioritize champions. So if there's minions and champions in range, it will hit the champions instead. This is an amazing early game harassment tool. It synergizes with her passive, which is known as Power Chord. So every 3 spells that Sona casts, she will get a Power Chord effect on her next auto attack, and the passive function with her Q is you deal extra damage. So basically what you do with Sona is you usually pick her Q first at level 1, you charge it up in the fountain right at the start of the game, and when you go out into lane, her first auto attack plus a Q will just deal a lot of damage. It'll deal about 150 damage roughly if you hit, well maybe not quite that much, but it deals over 100 damage if you hit on both her Q and then her Power Chord after it's been charged up. So Sona deals a ton of damage early game, and that's really the biggest issue with her. They should scale back her damage at level 1 and make it so that at level 9, when you put 5 points in the skill, it's still what it is right now, but they should scale it back early game. Then Sona's W skill is called Aria of Perseverance. It's her heal. Basically, it gives a passive aura effect, extra armor and magic resist for nearby champions. And then when you use the active function, it heals herself and another champ. Sona's heal is actually quite weak. It's one of the worst heals in the game. So one of the weaknesses of Sona is if you can get her to spam her heal, then she just runs herself out of mana very quickly. So it's not a good heal, and that's kind of her weakness. People think of Sona as a healer, but as an actual healer, she's not a very good healer at all. And the power chord effect of that is it decreases the attack of whoever she hits with it for 4 seconds. So it's an attack debuff. It's generally the thing that you use the least as a power chord, but it can be useful in some situations. Her E then is her movement speed skill. It's called Song of Celerity. It gives a passive movement speed, and then when you use the active, there's a short movement speed burst. Then the power chord effect is it slows whoever she hits for the next 1.5 seconds. This is a really nice skill. You only need 1 point in it, but it's a great skill. It gives you extra movement speed. It's very useful for chasing. Popping her E, and then if you can hit an enemy champ with a power chord slow, it's really useful. You can even flash and then power chord slow. And it's a really nice skill. So very useful for chasing and slowing. And again, this is one of the reasons why Sona is so prized. She can harass with her Q, she can heal with her W, she can slow and speed up people with her E. She just has so much utility to a team. Just brings all sorts of things and can fit into so many team comps. Then her ultimate is known as Crescendo. It's an area of effect, basically a stun. I mean, technically it makes people dance, but it's basically a stun. Area of effect causes people caught in it to be stunned and dance for 1.5 seconds. Doesn't really deal any damage. The damage is paltry, but any area of effect stun is of course just an amazing skill. So her kit is really, really strong, and that's why you see Sona getting played just so much. She can really do anything on the team. Like I said, she can harass, she can heal, she has utility to speed up and slow, and then she has an area of effect stun. So the strength of Sona is she can fit into almost any team comp whatsoever. You can honestly pair her with any AD and it'll work pretty well. Technically, she works a little bit better with people who have good harass early game, people who have good poke. So if you're going to have someone who dominates early game, like say Caitlyn, works quite well with Sona because you can poke at them. She works very well with Graves as well, just because you deal so much early game damage. But like I said, you can really pair her with anyone, and I have played Sona with just about any other AD with quite a bit of success. So really, at the moment, at least as I currently record this, Sona is great, and like I said, she fits in with just about anyone. Now, how to play against Sona? Well, like I said, the real weakness of Sona is how weak her heal is in the early game. So the best way to deal with Sona is try to dodge her Q harass. If you see Sona miss her Q and hit 2 minions, then you can move in and try to exchange harass. And if you're able to trade damage, then Sona's quite bad at healing in lane. So she's one of the worst healers, and people think of her as a sustain champ, but she's really not a sustain champ. So that's really her biggest weakness. So you want to try to dodge her Q, try to dodge her power chord, and try to dodge her crescendo, her ultimate. If you're able to do that, then you're in good shape, because if you can, exchange harass, like let's say if you're playing and you have Soraka and they have Sona, if you can exchange harass and avoid taking too much damage, you're going to come out ahead, because Sona doesn't heal very well. And I think I've said that a couple times. So anyway, that's what I have to say about Sona. First support champ I wanted to cover because she's one of the most commonly played support champs. All right, the next support I want to cover then is the one I just mentioned, Soraka, because you see Soraka all the time as well. And I've heard that there may be incoming Soraka nerfs as well, so we'll see where she ends up going. But Soraka is, again, one of the most commonly played supports, and one that's, of course, very well known to anyone who's playing. So let's go through her skills quickly. She has an innate passive that just gives everybody nearby extra magic resistance. It's 16 MR, and that's really quite good. 16 MR is like a full rune page for MR, so it's really actually not a bad passive at all. It tends to be a little bit less useful in lane because early on in lane most of the harass is going to be physical and not magic, but if you're against like a Corki or an Ezreal who deal a lot of magic damage, then it's really quite useful in lane as well. 16 MR is nothing to ignore right there. Anyway, Soraka's skills, her Q is known as Star Call. It's her only skill that deals damage. She just deals magic damage to everybody nearby. It's another skill that you don't aim. And then there's a magic resist debuff that reduces, whoever gets hit reduces their magic resist and can stack a whole bunch of times. This is easily Soraka's worst skill. It's something that you're not going to put many points in as a support. Maybe put 1 point in it at level 4 and max it last. But it's not something you're going to use very often. Really, you'd only use it for the magic resistance debuff. And like I said, it's just not something that's really how you play Soraka as a support. If you're going to play her as an AP champ, then yes, you're going to max this first. But as I said, Soraka is best played as a support. She's not really someone who's going to be going around killing people. Her W skill is called Astral Blessing. This is her heal. She restores health and grants bonus armor for 5 seconds. And the armor that's granted on this skill is just massive. It starts at 25 armor and then increases by 25 at each rank. So it's up to 125 armor at rank 5. And the heal also increases very significantly as well. So you get a lot of health back, and the bonus armor is just enormous. So the biggest drawback, of course, is that it's on a very long cooldown. It's actually on a 20-second cooldown. So for Soraka, trying to get a lot of cooldown reduction is really key. Anyway, playing as Soraka, this is the skill you want to max first. This is the one you want to focus on. The general idea is if you're going to trade, what you want to do is try to initiate trades with the other team's AD. You start trading, and then right when you start trading, as soon as your AD takes damage, you instantly dump your Astral Blessing on them, so it heals them and then grants them this massive armor, and you should be able to out-trade most teams if you're able to do that. And even if you're not, even if you come off a little bit worse for wear, Soraka sustains better than any other support in the game. So as long as you can avoid getting bursted down and dying, you'll be able to out-sustain any other lane. So that's really what you seek to do with Soraka as a support. You seek to trade them back and forth and then sustain, because you have better sustain than anyone else. But in terms of a straight-up fight, Soraka's not going to be dealing much, if any, damage. So in an actual burst fight, you're probably going to lose. Soraka's E skill is then her Infuse. It restores mana to the target and an equal amount to Soraka. So you should never use Infuse on yourself. You should always use it on your ally, your AD, because you'll both get the same amount of mana back. Alternately, you can use it on an enemy and it silences them, and the silence duration goes up with more points in the skill. So this is generally what you want to max second. This is another really useful skill. You have to decide whether to give mana back to your ally or yourself, or to use it to harass the other team. And even though it doesn't deal much damage, the harass will add up over time if you just keep silencing them over and over again. It actually doesn't cost any mana to use because it gives mana back. So with Soraka, you really don't have to worry about mana. You should never be running out of mana ever, because you can always just infuse your ally if you start to get low. So again, it's a really useful skill. The silence is great. The silence is great. If you see Amumu about to bandage trust into your team to use his ultimate, you silence him right as he bandage trusts in, and then you all kill him before he can get his ult off. So you can use some really clutch silences sometime. You can also prevent people from flashing away if you silence them right when they want to flash. So it's quite useful skill, and it's really Soraka's combination of her heal and her infuse that make her the champ that she is and gives her so much sustain. Then her ultimate is called Wish, and it's a global heal. Heals everybody on the map, and actually has really good scaling. The scaling is 0.7 AP ratio. So Soraka is just about the only support that building AP on really does matter. If you get like you can actually go for like a death cap in late game, and it really will help out your team. So with Soraka, once you hit 6, you need to be watching the map. You need to look around the map, see if there's fights going on, see if you can ult into fights to try to keep your teammates alive. And it's very easy to get assists this way. So it's if you're not getting a lot of assists with Soraka, then you're not playing her correctly, because you should be, there should be fighting somewhere on the map that you can always ult into. But you have to keep an eye on what your teammates are doing. Alright, so those are her skills. In terms of AD partners, Soraka tends to work well with people who have a lot of poke early game, because you can just sit back, let them dominate the lane, and then heal and sustain them. Alternately, you can pair Soraka with champions who are sort of weaker in lane. If you're going to you can just make no attempt to kill the other people and just concentrate on sustaining and farming. So you can play a lane like Soraka Ashe, and then you just sit back and farm. Like, you don't make any real attempt to kill the other people in lane. You're just like, okay, we're going to sit here and farm and sustain, and just wait until we get to mid and late game. So those are sort of the two things you'd try to pick. Either you're going to pick someone who spams their skills, like, say, Caitlyn or Misfortune, and you're just going to keep infusing them with mana and let them harass constantly. Or you're going to pick someone like, say, Ashe or Kog'Maw, and you're going to say, hey, we're not going to try to kill them, we're just going to sit back and farm. And we're just going to concentrate on sustaining and farming. So really, those are the two ways that you'd play the lane with Soraka, and either one can be valid, but you'd have to decide which way you want to play the lane first. If you're going to play a lane like Soraka Ashe, you're going to be playing defensively. You're not going to be playing real aggressively. So you just need to make that decision ahead of time. Then in terms of how to play against Soraka, well, Soraka is pretty simple to play against. The basic thing is you need to burst the other team down. That's how you beat a Soraka lane. You focus on burst, because if it's just sustain, Soraka can almost always out-sustain your damage if you're just trading back and forth with poking. So you want to concentrate on burst damage, and then the other key thing is whoever Soraka heals, you turn and focus the other target. This is really how you beat a Soraka lane. You try to bait out that heal, which has its huge armor buff, and then you immediately change targets and attack the other person. Whoever Soraka Soraka doesn't heal. So if Soraka heals herself, you immediately switch focus and try to kill the AD carry. If she heals the AD carry, you turn and try to burst down Soraka. So that's pretty much the way it works. Now, from what I've seen, 90 to 95% of players are not aware of this, and that's why they think Soraka is so strong. A lot of people think Soraka is just like unbeatable in lane, but it's because they're not playing it correctly. Soraka is very beatable in lane, but you have to understand how her heal works, and you have to understand how to play against it. Because if you're just ramming your head up against that 125 armor buff, so that, you know, the person you're attacking has like 200 armor, then no, you're not going to kill them. It's not going to work. So you have to understand, again, how her skills work. But yeah, you definitely can beat Soraka in lane. You just have to understand that you can't trade, you have to burst them down, and you have to understand to go after whoever she doesn't heal. Alright, so that's a little bit about Soraka. Let me move on now to some of the other commonly played supports, and I'll move on to probably my favorite support champ, which is Janna. Another longtime champ who's been around forever, has long been one of the best support champs. Alright, so I'm going to run through Janna's skills first of all. Janna is probably not sort of top tier right now as support, but she's very much viable, and she can be very strong if you play her correctly. But she has kind of a higher skill cap than some of the other supports in order to play her correctly. Her passive gives everybody 3% movement speed bonus, and which is great. Again, just pretty simple, but really nice to have on the team. Works really well for initiations, and if you have like a Singed or a Rammus or something on the team, they're just that much faster. Her Q is Howling Gale. This is her Tornado. This is basically a knock-up skill. You can charge it up over time. You can charge it up for up to, I think it's about 4 or 5 seconds, and the longer you charge it up, the more damage it deals, or you can just fire it off immediately. Anyone who gets hit by the Tornado takes damage and gets knocked up in the air. This skill is a pretty nice skill. This is the one that I actually maxed last with Janna, although I usually get 1 point in it at level 2. It's really nice for the utility on the knockup, but as far as a support Janna, it's not really going to be dealing any damage. You basically just want it for the knockup, so it's kind of a 1 point skill on her. Still, using her Tornado effectively can set up a lot of plays. You can cut off people's escape routes. You can use it to disengage from fights. People are chasing you. You just immediately pop a Tornado behind you. They all get knocked up into the air. So it's a great skill, but you can usually get by with just one point in it. Her W skill is then called Zephyr. It is both a passive and an active function. Passively, it gives her extra movement speed, starts at 8% up to 16%, and then the active is you can use it to slow enemies. But you do lose the passive movement speed boost while you do that. And the slow is quite significant as well. Let's see, I'm looking here at the stats. The slow starts at 24%, goes up to 48%. So it's a pretty significant slow, and it does last for 4 seconds. This is a great skill as well. I usually put my first point in it at level 4, but then max it second, because that passive movement speed bonus really makes you fast on the map, and the slow can help your team out a lot. It deals pretty good damage too. The AP ratio is quite nice. It's a 0.8 AP ratio, and it deals pretty good base damage as well. It deals 280 at max rank, which is rather high for base damage on a skill. So this is another really useful just utility skill. It makes you super fast in lane, allows you to run around so fast, and it's useful for the slow as well. So one of the advantages of Janna is she's really hard to catch. She's better at escaping than just about any other champ in the game because she's really fast, she has her knockup, and she has a slow. But the skill that makes Janna as a support is her E, which is called Eye of the Storm, and this is her shield. So let me explain what this does. When she puts the shield on someone, it both blocks damage, and then it also grants an attack damage bonus. So starts at 80 damage shield, goes up to 240, and the attack damage bonus starts at 14, goes up to 50. This is the skill that I put a point in first, and this is the skill I max first as Janna, and this is what makes her as a support. So you simultaneously will be granting a damage shield to your AD carry and also increasing their damage by a lot. At max rank, it's 50 damage, which is more than a BF sword. So that's really, really good. It's like I said, it's the skill that makes Janna as a support. So you both block damage and your AD carry deals additional damage. Now, the drawback is Janna does not have a heal, except on her ultimate, which we'll get to in a second, but doesn't really have a heal in the traditional sense. So you have to be pretty good at using the shield to block incoming damage, or else you get harassed out of lane. But if you're able to do that, then you can get some just amazing early game damage. A popular laning combination right now, particularly on the European servers, is Janna along with Misfortune. And you just go crazy for early game damage. With the shield and with starting with 80 runes and and a Doran's Blade, and Misfortune can get up to like 120 damage without any other items at like level 4 or level 5. So you can just deal so much damage that you're able to outtrade enemy teams even without the heal. So that's sort of what you often look to do with Janna, is you just look to outtrade enemy teams even without the heal. Then finally, Janna's ultimate, another very interesting skill, although it can be difficult to use. It's called Monsoon. It's an area of effect knockback. It pushes all enemies back away from the center. Basically, Janna is like at the center of a monsoon, and it pushes all enemies back away from her. And it also restores health to nearby allies every half second for up to 4 seconds. So basically, it's both like a global heal. Anyone who's standing inside gets healed, and it's also a knockback. So this has all sorts of uses. You can push enemies back. You can reposition them. You can just use it to heal your team. You can use it to disengage. You can push people back. You can push people into your tower. And like I said, one of the more frequent uses is just, our team's in all kinds of trouble. We just need to get out of this fight immediately. Janna pops R and everybody runs away, and you just saved your team. So it can be a difficult skill to use because you can really mess up your team using this too. But if you use it creatively, it has all sorts of nice uses. It's very good against an AoE team comp. If the enemy team is trying to run an area of effect damage team comp, like let's say they're running Morgana Amumu or something, Morgana runs into the middle of your team and pops her Soul Shackle, and then as Janna, you just hit R, and all of a sudden, everybody's blown back and knocked in the opposite direction. And now Morgana's ultimate has just been ruined, and your team is free to pounce on them. So it's a very nice ultimate, but it does take a bit of practice to use, and knowing when and where to use it is one of the skills that a good Janna player will have to learn. As far as AD partners, Janna can sort of be played two ways. One is to just stack early game damage, play with Caitlyn or Misfortune, someone who's very much early game focused, and you just pile on the early game damage. You try to try to do more damage than they can sustain in lane. This is why Misfortune Janna is popular. This is why Caitlyn, I've seen Caitlyn and Janna less often, but it is very viable. You just deal so much early game damage that you just basically force them out of lane. And the fact that they have a heal doesn't really matter. The other way to play Janna is just to rely on her utility skills and try to farm in lane. So this is sort of the other side of that. That would be a pairing like Ashe along with Janna, or Kog'Maw along with Janna. Varus, Nox, and I have played this a lot and had success with it. Basically, in a situation like that, Janna just uses her various skills to protect Kog'Maw, to peel people off who try to dive him, and then just allow him to farm in lane. So, in a team fight, everybody is trying to dive at Kog'Maw, but meanwhile, Janna is using her tornado to knock people away, using her monsoon to push people away, using her slow, and just keeping that damage shield on the AD carry. So that's sort of the other way you can play this lane. It's like, hey, we're just going to use Janna's utility to keep the AD safe in lane as much as possible. So again, that's sort of the two pairings you could go for there. Similar to what I just said about Soraka, but that's sort of how you would set that up. All right, let's turn, and this is going on, it's been pretty long already, but I do want to cover the rest of these, so let's try to run through the rest of the supports as well. I'm going to talk about Alistar next. He's another one of the support people who have been played as a support for a long time right now. Popular support, one of the more aggressive supports, so let's talk about why that is. His innate passive is called Trample. Every time he casts a spell, he deals magic damage per second to nearby enemy units and structures. It's not the most useful passive as a support. You can get a little extra damage from Trample. It was intended to help him farm, but as a support, it doesn't really matter all that much. So it's kind of a wasted passive on Alistar, unfortunately. But it's still probably better than his old passive, which meant he did more damage to turrets, which was probably even less useful as a support. Anyway, his Q skill is called Pulverize. It's probably his best skill. It's an area of effect stun. He smashes the ground, deals magic damage to all enemies, knocks them up for 1 second, and then stuns them upon landing for another half second. So it's an area of effect stun. The range is relatively small. You pretty much have to be standing next to somebody to use it. But again, you can stun everybody on the enemy team if you use it. So it's a really, really nice skill. Usually you put a point at this at level 1, and it makes Alistar amazing for level 1 fights, as he can stun everybody on the enemy team. One of the keys of playing Alistar, and by the way, you have to take Flash as a summoner if you're playing as Alistar. You just have to have Flash. One of the keys to playing Alistar is knowing when to Flash Pulverize, because you can set up a ton of plays for your team that way. So put a point in this at level 1, and then I generally max it second, just because putting more points in it increases the damage, but really why you put more points in it is to lower the cooldown, which is very high. It starts at 17 seconds, goes down to 13 with 5 points. His second skill, his W, is called Headbutt, and this is another one of Alistar's trademark skills. He dashes to the enemy, headbutts them, deals magic damage, and knocks them back. So it's a knockback skill. He will knock people back in the direction of the headbutt. If you can knock somebody back into a wall or a terrain feature, then they will be temporarily stunned. So one of the key plays of Alistar is to headbutt somebody into a wall. They'll be stunned temporarily, then pulverize them. So then you've gotten basically a double stun out of it. So that's one of the things that you can do. Now, there's another combo that you can do with Alistar as well. If you get the timing just right, you can headbutt somebody, and then if you use your pulverize in mid-animation for the pulverize, you can knock them up into the air. So you can actually close distance between them by doing a headbutt pulverize combo. And this is a little bit tricky to pull off, but it can be done. It takes practice. I still mess it up when I do it, but if you play Alistar enough, you'll get the timing right. Basically, if you headbutt pulverize someone, you close the distance with headbutt and then immediately knock them up into the air with pulverize. So this is a great way to set up combinations. Now, alternately, you can do things like use your flash behind them, pulverize them back towards your team, and then when they try to run away, you use pulverize. That's one of the more complicated combos to do, but again, if you can, flash behind them, headbutt them into a tower, and then pulverize them while they're still taking tower damage, you can often get a kill that way. So repositioning people and stunning them is what Alistar is all about, but he's one of the harder champs to use. It kind of takes a lot of practice to get this down. So he has a bit of a high skill cap. He's one of the harder supports to play, but if you can pull that off, then he can be very effective. Now, his third skill, his E skill, is called Triumphant Roar, and this is basically just his heal. Heals himself and heals nearby friendly units. It actually heals minions as well as champions. He heals himself and then heals allies for half of the heal amount. It's a relatively weak heal, but it doesn't cost much mana, so you can spam it liberally. So I usually put a point in this at either level 2 or level 3 and then max this first, because it doesn't heal for very much. You kind of need to max it quickly. So anyway, it's not a great heal, but it is area of effect. You can actually heal everyone on the team with this, and if you put enough points with it, it works pretty well. So Alistar has decent sustain in lane. I wouldn't say tremendous, but pretty good. It's actually probably better than what Sona does, just because it costs so little mana that you can spam it endlessly. Then finally, Alistar's ultimate, called Unbreakable Will. He removes all crowd control effects from himself. So yes, it is a free cleanse, something to keep in mind. Gains extra attack damage, and then he takes 50% reduced damage for 7 seconds. So, well, no, actually, never mind. This is outdated what I'm looking at here. Damage reduction starts at 50%, goes up to 70% with more points in the skill. It's a useful ultimate. It's good for initiations. It's quite nice for tanking tower shots. You can stand under a tower and tank shots for the rest of the team. The fact that it's a free cleanse is also quite good. Basically, it just makes it so people don't want to target you in a team fight. It's a way of Alistar can run into the middle of the team with his ult running and get off a pulverize on everybody on the enemy team. Sort of the main way that you would use this skill. So, I mean, it's not the easiest ult to use either. You sort of have to know when to ult and when not to ult. But by the same token, it just if you're getting focused in a team fight, pop your ult. If you guys are about to tower dive, make sure that you're the one tanking the tower and pop your ult, and you won't take much damage for it. So things along that line, basically. The bonus attack damage is nice, but it doesn't really do that much. You can get in a few more hits. One thing you can do with Alistar is you can build Sheen. Sheen is actually quite good on Alistar because it synergizes well with his skills. You know, you headbutt somebody, then you get a proc from Sheen. Then you pulverize someone, then you get a proc from Sheen. Every time you use your heal, you get a proc from Sheen. And his damage is higher than most other supports. And again, he gets attack damage on his ult too. So that's one difference for Alistar. You can build Sheen on him. I wouldn't say it's a high priority, but you can do it. Now, in terms of laning partners, Alistar is an aggressive support. Alistar works well with champs who have a lot of crowd control and people who are going for kills in the early game. So one combination that I've seen do well sometimes is you can play him with someone like Vayne, who has a lot of crowd control. Alistar headbutts you into the wall, then he uses Pulverize, then Vayne condemns you into the wall, and that's triple stuns, and that's very, very dangerous. Alternately, you could just pair him with someone who deals a lot of damage early game, like again I've mentioned him with Caitlyn, I've mentioned with Misfortune, so champs that deal a lot of early game damage. He's not going to work very well with a more passive farmer in lane. That's the thing. He might do pretty well with someone like Corki too. Someone like Corki who has a lot of burst. Someone who has a lot of burst also would work well. But I don't think Alistar would go well with someone like Ashe, who's just going to sit back and farm. Oh, the other champ I haven't mentioned, he works really well with Tristana. Tristana is probably his best laning combination partner because you have double stun. You can have the double stun with Alistar. Then Trist jumps in and Trist uses her whole combo, and you just deal a lot of burst damage. So Alistar works well with burst champs. supports. And like I said, Tristana is probably his best laning partner. You both at level 2. Alistar uses Headbutt Pulverize. Trist uses Rocket Jump and her Explosive Shot. Tristana often has Ignite, and then boom, you've just full comboed somebody from 100% to dead at level 2. So that's kind of what you're going for there. As far as playing against Alistar, the key thing is to avoid the terrain obstacles. You want to avoid the possibility of him headbutting you into a wall. That's sort of the biggest thing. That's the easiest way for him to get off a double stun. Other than that, the other thing to be aware of is if you see him flash into the middle of your team, if you're really fast, you can then use a defensive flash. So beware of his Headbutt Pulverize and beware of his Flash Pulverize. That's sort of the key things to be aware of. Other than that, remember, he has no ranged attack. He's all melee. So you can use that to your advantage as well. You can oftentimes get in harass because, like I said, he has no ranged attack. So that's sort of the other thing you could take advantage of there. But he has a lot. He can be very dangerous in lane. You do have to be careful about that. Okay, let's move on to the last of the traditional supports, and that would be Taric. And Taric has been coming back into vogue a little bit lately. He wasn't played for a long time, but he's been come back into vogue a bit recently. Anyway, his passive gives him mana regen. When he auto attacks, he gets back extra mana. It's not the best passive, but I mean you can use it. Basically, the idea that the Riot was going for is to make him a little bit more aggressive in lane, to try to auto attack to get mana back. So I mean, I can see what it's going for, but as a support, you just don't auto attack that much. So it's not the greatest passive. Anyway, his first skill is known as his Imbue, his Q. This is his heal. He heals both himself. If he heals only himself, he gets 40% more health from the heal. If he heals an ally, then they both get healed for the same amount. So this is why Taric is sort of a natural support. His heal is much better when he heals someone else because they both get healed for the same amount. And the cooldown for this is quite long. It's 20-second cooldown, goes down to 16 seconds with more points in the skill. But the cooldown goes down if he auto attacks. So it's like Riot really wants him to auto attack. But like I said, you just don't auto attack that much. One of the biggest problems for this is Taric doesn't have that much mana, and his heal is very expensive in terms of how much mana it costs. It starts at 80 and goes up to 140 at max rank. So if you're healing a lot in lane, you'll run out of mana very quickly as Taric. So you have to be a bit careful with this. It is a pretty nice heal, but it's on a long cooldown, and you run yourself out of mana quickly if you use it. His W is a passive skill. It's known as Shatter. Well, it has a passive aura. It grants bonus armor to anyone nearby. Starts at 10 armor up to 30 armor at max rank, which is very, very nice. But the active function is he breaks the Shatter aura. He loses the bonus armor aura in order to deal magic damage and do the same amount of bonus armor he gets is an armor reduction to whoever he hits. So basically what you do as Taric is if you run up to somebody, you use Shatter, you lose your bonus armor, but you reduce their armor as well. And it's pretty significant as well. Losing, like 30 armor off of a champ who hasn't built much armor is pretty significant. So relatively short cooldown, 10-second cooldown, and deals magic damage, reduces armor. Very useful skill. Nice to have the passive effect when it's up. His E skill is his most well-known skill. It's called Dazzle, and this is his stun. It's a ranged stun, shoots a ball of light towards the enemy target, deals magic damage. The magic damage is very minimal. This skill deals almost no damage, and then stuns them for 1.5 seconds. So this is really Taric's best skill. It's a point-and-click stun, range stun, stuns at range, and stuns for 1.5 seconds. So it's a very, very nice skill, and it's used to set up most of Taric's laning combinations. Basically, you toss out that stun with your E on your Dazzle, then you use Shatter, and while they're stunned, your AD beats on them and deals as much damage as possible. So that's pretty much how Taric's combo is set up. Then finally, his active is called Radiance. It deals nearby magic damage when he first uses it, and then for the next 10 seconds, Taric gains extra attack damage and ability power, and nearby allies get half the benefit. So it's again pretty useful for combo play. Once Taric hits 6, you use your stun, run in, use Shatter, use your ultimate, and try to burst people down. Now, Taric is an aggressive laner as well. He's based around using his stun. If you're not able to stun people, then Taric's almost useless in lane because, again, he does not have a ranged attack, only has melee. What you'd want to do as Taric is try to get that stun off and then run in and, like I said, use Shatter, use Radiance, and then try to have your AD kill the other person while that's going on. Taric has become quite popular as a laning partner for Sivir. The way that that works is Taric will stun with his Dazzle, and then while they're stunned, Sivir tosses her Boomerang Blade and gets a double hit because you can't dodge it because you're stunned, and it really does work quite well. Alternately, he works well with burst heroes, so Taric traditionally has worked pretty well with Corki. He works pretty well with Tristana as well. You just stun them, and then you and the other AD use your entire burst combo, and you try to burst them down before they can do anything. As far as sustain goes, he's not nearly as good at sustain. Like I said, he tends to run out of mana with if you just are trying to get into a sustain war. So that's not really his strength. His strength is bursting people down with an aggressive laning partner. So I wouldn't really suggest trying to play like Taric Ashe or like I don't know, Kog'Maw with Taric. I just don't think that those laning matchups work very well. He's not a sustain champ. He's a burst champ. So he works well with people who can burst people down. And then, of course, there's always been the famous Taric-Caitlyn pairing, where Taric gets the stun off, Caitlyn runs up and tosses down a trap, so you get double stun if you pull it off correctly, and you get in a lot of damage. So those are some of the most popular laning matchups. How to play against Taric? Avoid his stun. It's really what it comes down to. Try not to get stunned. If you get stunned, then you're in trouble. If you don't get stunned, then you're good to go. That's really, I know it sounds simple, but that's really all it is. Try to ward the brushes in bottom lane if you're playing against Taric, because if you can ward the brush, you can usually see his position and you can dodge the stun much more easily. I wish I could say more than that, but that's really what it comes down to. Dodge his stun and you're okay. If he stuns you, you're in trouble. Anyway, those have been the traditional 5 supports for a very, very long time. There are a couple other supports that people play right now that I'm going to run through quickly and just talk about their skills. So there are 3 others that I think are viable right now that I've seen in competitive play. And the first one of these, the ones that's being used the most often, is Nunu. So again, talking just briefly about Nunu support, the way that this works is you max his W skill, his Blood Boil. This is where he grants extra attack speed and movement speed to both himself and the AD carry. So he drop Blood Boil on the carry, and then you both are running around super fast, and you have extra attack speed, and it's really, really nice. This then synergizes well with his E, his Snowball, technically known as Ice Blast, but it deals magic damage and slows. Starts at 20% slow, up to 60% slow. So basically, you give extra movement speed to your ally, and you then slow the enemy with your Ice Blast. So that's pretty much how it works. Your AD carry attacks really fast and can chase. Their AD carry gets slowed, gets an attack speed debuff, and they take magic damage as well. So it's pretty much based on using those 2 skills. His Consume, his Q, can heal him in lane, but Nunu has no way to heal his AD. So the fact that he has no heal means that your AD has to be rather careful. Probably has to go for an earlier Vamp Scepter so that they can sustain themselves in lane with auto-attacking. And I mean, it's a little bit gimmicky, but it does work with certain champs. It works really well with Kog'Maw, and to a lesser extent, it works well with a champ like Sivir, just because they deal a lot of early game damage. So this is something that Moscow 5 has popularized. It's something you don't see too often, but it does work in the right circumstances. Again, it's based around using his Blood Boil and his Ice Blast. His Consume, not that useful. His Ultimate, which is an area of effect, slow and magic damage. If you have to channel it for 3 seconds, and it deals huge damage if enemies take the full channel. Difficult to use. Generally, you want to set up in the brush. Try not to get interrupted. But if you can get it off on the full team, then it's pretty devastating. In order to play against that, well, basically, you just try to harass them because a Nunu lane doesn't have much sustain. Again, you just want to try to harass them and take advantage of the fact that they don't have much sustain. Sort of the way you'd play against that. Easier said than done, though. In the right circumstance, it's very difficult to play against Nunu support, especially if the other team gets ahead. Now, last 2 supports, Blitzcrank is another support. I haven't seen him played recently in competitive play, but I have seen him played in the past. Blitzcrank is, again, a lane that's all about crowd control. He has a ton of crowd control on his various kit. His signature ability is his Q, his rocket grab. It's difficult to land, but if you can grab people and pull them back, it's probably the single best non-ultimate skill in the game because it's just such a game changer. If you're able to hit grabs, then you can just completely destroy people. Grab somebody, pull them back into the tower, pull them into places they don't want to be. Just an absolutely fabulous skill, but it's on a very long cooldown, and it's a difficult skill to hit somebody with. His other skills, his W is called Overdrive, grants extra movement speed and attack speed for 8 seconds. It's a shame that it doesn't grant that to your laning partner. It's only for Blitzcrank, but it does make him insanely fast. He gets 32% movement speed. He runs really fast. And then that synergizes with his E, which is called Power Fist. It's his knock-up, knocks somebody up into the air on his next auto attack. So there's kind of two ways to play as Blitzcrank with his kit. Basically, you either rocket grab somebody, then immediately knock them up into the air with Power Fist, and then continue beating on them and chasing them with his overdrive. Or alternately, you pop his overdrive, his movement speed, and you just run up to them because you're so fast. You just run up to them and then hit them with Power Fist for the knockup. And then if they try to run away or flash, then you try to use your rocket grab then. So those are sort of the two ways that you can play Blitzcrank. Either initiate with his rocket grab or initiate with his movement speed overdrive, using his knockup with Power Fist somewhere in there. And then finally, his ultimate is Static Field. It has a passive and active function. Every 2.5 seconds, it deals damage to a random unit nearby. Might be minion, might be a champ. So that doesn't deal a lot of damage, but does add up over time. Then the active function is he can remove the passive function to deal an area of effect magic damage and silence. Pretty useful skill if you're in the middle of a team fight. You don't want to use it right away because you want that passive function running. But if it looks like someone's going to flash away or going to try to disengage, you can silence everybody for 0.5 seconds. So it's a nice skill as well. Anyway, Blitzcrank, again, has tons of crowd control, but the weakness is he has no sustain, and he doesn't really do anything for his laning partner. Unfortunately, none of his skills really do that much to help his... He doesn't have anything that really synergizes that well with a laning partner. He just has tons and tons of crowd control, and of course, he always has that rocket grab. So, I haven't seen him in competitive play recently, but he has been played in some pretty big tournaments before, and sometimes with success. So, it might just be that nobody is really playing him right now, but I do think that he... definitely counts as one of the viable supports right now, just because he has so much crowd control. If you can pull it off effectively, it's a huge deal. Then finally, the last support I want to cover is Leona. I think she's the last of sort of the viable supports. And again, she's pretty similar to Blitzcrank in a lot of ways. Just tons of crowd control on her kit. And it's all based about playing aggressively with her in lane. Her passive deals marks enemy units. Anytime she uses a skill, she marks enemy units with a sunlight charge. If another allied champ deals damage to them, they consume the sunlight charge and deals additional magic damage. So in order to use her passive, she has to be laning with someone else. So she really is not much of a solo. It's also because she doesn't really deal any damage, but whatever. So she needs another laner with her just to use her passive. As far as her kit goes, she has a point-and-click stun on her Q, her Shield of Daybreak. Deals extra magic damage and stuns the target for 1.25 seconds. So it's a useful skill, but it is melee range. Have to be right next to somebody to get off the stun on her Shield of Daybreak. Her W is called Eclipse. She gets extra armor and magic resist bonus for the next 3 seconds, and it also deals minor magic damage. Not a lot, but deals modest magic damage. So when she pops her W, she gets a shield that increases armor and magic resist, and then deals magic damage to nearby units when it pops. Then her E is her gap closer. It's called Zenith Blade. She shoots out a little sword effect, and anyone that she hits will be stunned temporarily for a half second, and Leona will dash towards them. So her basic combo is pop Eclipse, pop her W to get the extra armor magic resist, then shoot her Zenith Blade. If it hits somebody, you get pulled towards them, and they get stunned for a half second. Then immediately follow that up with her Q, her Shield of Daybreak. So you can get a double stun there. Then finally, her ultimate is called Solar Flare. Calls down a beam of solar energy after a brief delay that it stuns enemies that are hit directly by the solar flare and slows people who aren't hit in the exact center. So it has decent range. It's another nice initiation tool. You toss this down, and if you hit it correctly, they get stunned. If not, they get slowed. And then you're able to follow it up with the rest of your combo with your Zenith Blade into your Shield of Daybreak. So technically, if you play it correctly, Leona does have a triple stun on her kit, which is really nice. The downside is they're basically all skill shots to use them, so you have to be pretty good at comboing in order to play her. And of course, if you screw up and you get behind in lane, the fact that there's no sustain, there's no heal whatsoever, can mean that you're just screwed. So you can't fall behind. Champions like Blitzcrank and Leona are when you're going for kill lanes. You have to get ahead. You have to get kills. If you don't do so and you fall behind, then you're just going to get destroyed by a traditional sustain lane with a traditional pairing of ADs. So for Leona, AD partners, you're going to want someone who, again, is very aggressive, can deal a lot of damage, has a lot of crowd control. Their traditional lane that people have played is Leona with Jarvan because of all the because of all their knockups, stuns, crowd control, the fact that Jarvan has very high base damage without items. So that's sort of been a traditional laning partner. As far as other ADs, again, just burst champs, people deal a lot of burst damage with Tristana, I think, would work pretty well. Maybe with someone like Misfortune, because there's just a lot of damage there that the two of you could do together. If Misfortune could use like a full early game ultimate into all of your crowd control, all of your stuns, that would deal, that would work pretty well. So anyway, something like that. You need to play her with an aggressive laner. You cannot just sit back and try to farm fest if you're playing with Leona. And that goes with Blitzcrank as well. You would need an aggressive laner. Okay, well, this video is at the 53-minute mark, so I'm going to wrap it up here. If you guys have any more questions about supports I didn't answer, feel free to post them in the comments and let me know, and I'll try to get back to you either with comments of my own or in a future video. But in any case, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that this answered some of the questions that people had. I really do wish that we would get more support champions, because I think it's a little silly that we have about 30 to 40 AP champs, and we only have really 8 support champs, and even that's stretching it. But anyway, Riot seems to hate support, so who knows. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.